They gave her a clipboard and called her a ghost. They gave him a command and called him a master chief. He saw a woman where he should have seen a weapon. He saw protocol where he should have seen a solution. By the time the mountain groaned and the sea rose to claim his men, it was too late. The ghost was already in the machine, and she was about to teach them all a lesson in the physics of failure. The air over Kodiak Island was a whetstone, sharp and cold, honing the edge of everything it touched. It smelled of salt, wet rock, and the deep, ancient chill of glacial melt. Specialist Anya Sharma, though no one here used her name, felt the air not on her skin, but as a dataset. Barometric pressure, 1,014 hectopascals and falling. Wind speed, 18 knots, gusting to 25 from the northeast, a direction that carried the memory of the Bering Sea's fury. Humidity was a clinging, saturating 93%, turning every breath into a sip of cold fog. She stood apart from the cluster of SEAL candidates, a lone still figure on the shingle beach, her focus aimed not at the churning gray water, but at the slate-dark cliffs that clawed at the sky behind them. Her designation here was Observer Analyst, a title so bland it was practically camouflage. She wore standard-issue fatigues, devoid of rank or insignia, and her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot. Her face, pale and composed, was a mask of professional neutrality. In her hands, she held not a rifle, but a ruggedized tablet, its screen a silent swirl of numbers, graphs, and topographical overlays. She was tracing the fracture lines in the cliff face, the complex network of joints and faults invisible to the untrained eye, but screamingly obvious to hers. She cross-referenced them with the bathymetric charts of the inlet, her fingers swiping through layers of data, building a four-dimensional model of the environment in her mind. Rock, water, pressure, time. They were all variables in a single, elegant, and exceptionally dangerous equation. The men, 20 of them, were lumps of shivering misery clad in black neoprene. They were in the final phase of a specialized cold water insertion course, a brutal capstone to their already inhuman training. They stood in the punishing surf, their teeth chattering in a rhythm that was almost, but not quite, synchronized. Their bodies were instruments of force, honed to a razor's edge, but right now they were just men, losing a battle of thermodynamics against the North Pacific. She registered their state with the same clinical detachment she applied to the geology. Core temperatures dropping, muscle fatigue escalating, cognitive function degrading at a predictable rate. They were another data set. Then he arrived. The sound of his boots on the wet gravel was a disruption of the natural order, a percussive declaration of authority that grated against the sigh of the waves and the cry of the gulls. Master Chief Petty Officer Thorne was a monument to the old way, carved from granite and indignation. He was a big man, made bigger by the sheer force of his presence. His jaw was a slab of granite, his eyes were chips of ice, and his voice, when it came, was a blunt instrument designed for breaking things. "On your faces!" he bellowed, the sound cutting through the wind like a thrown axe. The 20 men, without hesitation, dropped into the slurry of sand and freezing water, their groans swallowed by the roar of an incoming wave that washed over them. Thorne strode along the line, his boots sinking into the wet shingle, a predator pacing before his caged and exhausted prey. He radiated a heat that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with friction and pressure. He was a man who believed the world could be hammered into any shape he desired. His gaze swept past the suffering candidates and snagged on her. She did not flinch, did not look up from her screen. She simply continued her work, her thumb tracing the path of a submarine channel. He changed course, his steps now heavy with intent, and stopped a few feet from her. The air between them became a vacuum. The men, pushing themselves up from the surf, felt the shift, their own misery momentarily forgotten in the presence of this new, more focused storm. "What is this?" Thorne's voice was low, but it carried a weight that bent the air around it. He gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist towards her tablet. "You playing games, specialist?" She finished her notation, the stylus making a final, precise tap on the screen. Only then did she look up. Her eyes were dark, calm, and gave away nothing. They were like the deep water beyond the continental shelf, full of things he could not see and would never understand. "I am logging resonant frequencies of the littoral shelf," she stated. It was not an explanation. It was a fact, delivered with the same weight as the atmospheric pressure reading. A muscle jumped in Thorne's jaw. He hated that. He hated the calm, the precision, the utter lack of deference. He was used to fear, or at least the sharp metallic tang of respect born of it. She offered neither. She offered data. "Resonant frequencies," he repeated, his voice a gravelly sneer. He took a step closer, invading her space, a classic primate display of dominance. She didn't move, didn't even seem to register the proximity. She was a stone in a river, and he was the water, wasting its energy trying to move her. "This is a combat training evolution, not a science fair. My men are learning how to fight and die in this water. What are you doing here besides taking up oxygen?" The challenge was public, a deliberate attempt to sever her from the herd, to mark her as other, as useless. The trainees watched, their faces impassive, but their eyes alert. They were learning a lesson in power dynamics, one not found in any training manual. "I am modeling environmental threat vectors," she replied, her tone unchanged. "Specifically, the probability of submarine landslide events triggered by seismic precursors and amplified by tidal hydrostatic pressure within the inlet's cave systems." She turned her gaze back to the cliffs, a silent dismissal. "The geological stability here is suboptimal." Thorne stared at her, his face a mask of simmering rage and disbelief. It was gibberish. It was a deliberate attempt to use big words to make him feel small, a tactic of the weak, the academic, the non-warrior. He saw her not as a specialist, but as a symptom of a disease creeping into his world, a reliance on computers and theories over grit and instinct. She was a pencil pusher in a world of hammers, and he was the biggest hammer of all. "Suboptimal," he mocked, his voice dripping with scorn. "Let me tell you what's suboptimal, specialist. A civilian analyst standing on my beach critiquing a piece of rock that has been here for 10,000 years. The only threat vector I see is you, distracting my men with your little tricorder." He jabbed a thick finger toward her tablet. "That thing won't save you when the water closes over your head." "It is not designed to save me," she said, her voice a quiet counterpoint to his roar. "It is designed to predict the conditions under which the water will close over your head." A short, sharp bark of laughter escaped him. It was a humorless sound. "Is that so? Predict this." He turned to the assembled men. "Team Alpha, you see that cave? The one they call the Devil's Throat?" He pointed to a dark maw in the cliff face, a jagged wound in the rock just at the tide line, frothing with surf. "The exercise is simple. You will swim your zodiac to the entrance, submerge, Enter the cave system, navigate to the inland emergence point 200 meters in, and signal your success. Simple as that. A young petty officer, Reyes, one of the more seasoned candidates in the group, spoke up, his voice tight with cold and concern. Master Chief, the tide's turning. The currents through the throat will be treacherous. Standard procedure is to run this exercise on a slack tide. Thorne's head snapped toward him. Are you questioning my order, petty officer? No, Master Chief, Reyes said, his gaze dropping. Just stating a fact. Facts are my business, Thorne growled. Your business is to do what you are told. The enemy doesn't wait for a slack tide. Now get to it. He turned his glare back to Sharma, a triumphant, ugly look on his face. He was reasserting the natural order. He was making the world right again. He was proving that his will, not her data, was the operative force on this beach. Let's see if your little computer predicts their success. She said nothing. She simply zoomed in the overlay on her screen, her expression unreadable. The model was now a swirling vortex of red and yellow, a silent, digital scream. The probability of a cascade failure within the cave system, triggered by the exact hydrostatic pressure changes of the incoming tide, had just ticked past 75%. It was no longer a risk. It was a near certainty. She watched as Team Alpha, 8 men, loaded their gear into the black rubber boat, their movements stiff with cold but ingrained with years of training. They were a flawless machine, executing a flawed command. They were paddling into the jaws of a trap she had seen coming for hours. Her job was to observe, to analyze, to report. It was not to intervene. That was the rule. But as she watched them push off into the churning gray water, she felt a different variable enter her internal equation, one that had no place in physics or geology. It was the cold, hard weight of responsibility. The rule was about to be broken. She continued to stand her ground, a silent sentinel, as the Zodiac, a black insect on a furious sea, fought its way toward the cave. Thorne stood with his arms crossed, a statue of arrogant certainty. He had made his point. He had established the primacy of will over intellect, of action over analysis. The exhausted men of Team Bravo watched from the surf line, their own suffering a dull ache compared to the sharp anxiety of watching their brothers paddle toward the devil's throat. The air was thick with unspoken things. Sharma's focus was absolute, her senses extending beyond the visible spectrum. She wasn't just watching, she was listening. Not with her ears, but with the array of passive sensors she had quietly deployed along the cliff base earlier that morning. Miniature geophones, no bigger than a coin, fed a constant stream of microseismic data to her tablet. She was listening to the bones of the mountain. The sound it made was a low, discordant hum, a song of stress and strain. The incoming tide was not just water. It was a weight, a massive hydraulic press squeezing the fractured rock, forcing water into ancient fissures, increasing pore pressure to a critical threshold. On her screen, a specific frequency began to spike, a sharp peak rising from the background noise. It was the cave system's resonant frequency, the natural vibration at which the entire network of tunnels and chambers began to amplify incoming energy, just as a wine glass will shatter from a specific musical note. The rhythmic pulse of the waves crashing against the cliffs was the orchestra. The cave was the glass, and it was beginning to sing its breaking song. "They're at the entrance, Master Chief," Reyes reported, his voice tight. The Zodiac bobbed violently in the turbulent water at the mouth of the cave. The men, one by one, slipped over the side and disappeared into the dark, roiling water, their fins the last thing to be swallowed by the sea. The boat, now empty, was tethered to a rock spur. "Sea specialist?" Thorne said, not looking at her, his voice thick with smug satisfaction. "Action, not prediction. That's how you get things done." She did not reply. Her eyes were fixed on the tablet. The resonant frequency spike had just gone vertical. A cascade of alerts began to flash across the screen, each one a nail in the coffin. Pore pressure threshold exceeded. Shear stress, anomaly, detected. Microfracture cascade, imminent. It was happening. And then the world flinched. It was not a loud sound. It was a deep, gut-wrenching groan that seemed to come from the core of the earth itself. It was a sound of immense friction, of rock grinding against rock on a scale that dwarfed human comprehension. The shingle beach vibrated, a tremor that ran up through the soles of Sharma's boots and into her bones. A flock of gulls screeched and scattered from the cliff face, their panic a sudden explosion of white against the gray sky. A section of the cliff face, 50 yards to the left of the Devil's Throat, simply detached. It didn't explode outwards. It slumped, a tired giant giving up the ghost. 100,000 tons of rock and earth slid into the sea with a sound like a tearing world. The displacement was instantaneous and massive. A huge, ugly wave, not of water, but of thick, muddy slurry, erupted from the point of impact. But that was not the real danger. The real danger was invisible. The seismic shockwave of the landslide, traveling through the water at nearly a mile a second, hit the entrance to the Devil's Throat. It was the perfect percussive strike, delivered at the exact moment the cave system was at its most vulnerable, its resonant frequency already amplified by the tide. The result was a catastrophic structural failure. A deep, cracking roar echoed from within the cliffs, a sound of immense violence. The jagged maw of the Devil's Throat visibly convulsed. A huge slab of rock from the cave's lintel sheared off and plunged into the water, followed by a torrent of smaller rocks and debris. The entrance was gone, sealed. A cloud of rock dust and sea spray billowed out from the collapse, a final, choking exhalation. A profound, terrible silence fell, broken only by the hiss of the waves and the distant, panicked cries of the gulls. The Zodiac, its tether snapped, was already being swept away by the chaotic currents. Team Alpha was gone, buried alive. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. The remaining trainees stared, their faces blank with shock. Thorne stood frozen, his look of smug triumph having shattered and fallen away, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. His world of simple cause and effect, of will and action, had just been obliterated by a force he could not command, could not intimidate, could not even understand. He had sent 8 of his men to their deaths. "My God," someone whispered. Thorne unfroze, his training kicking in, but it was a clumsy, panicked reflex, not a considered response. "Team Bravo, get the comms. I want a channel to Fleet Command. Now, get me a subsea rescue unit. Get me EOD. Get me a goddamn drilling rig." His voice was loud, but it was brittle, laced with the sharp edge of panic. He was shouting orders, throwing protocol at a problem that was utterly beyond its scope. He was trying to hammer an earthquake. Reyes was already moving, but his eyes met Sharma's for a fleeting second. He saw no panic in her face. He saw no shock. He saw only a cold, intense focus. She was already working, her fingers flying across the screen of her tablet, the display now a complex, shifting schematic of the collapsed cave system. She was not reacting to the disaster. She was dissecting it. "Master Chief," Reyes said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "A rescue unit is hours away. They won't get here in time. Air supply?" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The standard scuba tanks the men carried held, at best, an hour of air, less under stress. They had maybe 45 minutes. Maybe. "Don't tell me the odds, petty officer. Just do what I told you," Thorne roared, his control fraying completely. He was a man drowning, and he was grabbing at anything that floated. "We need to set explosive charges, blow a new entrance." "Sir, you can't!" The voice was Sharma's. It was not loud, but it cut through Thorne's tirade with the precision of a laser. Every head turned to her. She hadn't moved from her spot, but the entire gravity of the situation had now coalesced around her. Thorne rounded on her, his face contorted with fury and desperation. "You stay out of this. This is a rescue operation, not a damn debate club. A blind explosive charge will collapse the entire system," she stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The initial landslide has destabilized the primary magnesian limestone strata. The entire cliff is a house of cards. A sympathetic detonation, even a small one, will trigger a complete structural failure. You will not be creating an entrance. You will be creating a tomb." Her words hung in the cold air, each one a perfectly weighted stone. She was not offering an opinion. She was delivering a verdict. The clinical certainty in her voice was more chilling than the disaster itself. She had predicted this, and now she was predicting the outcome of his only plan. For the first time, a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced Thorne's armor of rage. He looked from her calm, analytical face to the impassive wall of rock that had swallowed his men, his methods, his experience, his entire worldview were useless. Brute force, the only tool in his arsenal, was not just ineffective, it was suicidal. "Then what?" he spat, the question a confession of his own impotence. "What do we do, analyst? Do we just stand here and let them die while you model the situation?" It was in that moment that the shift occurred. It was not a formal transfer of power, but a natural, inexorable flow of authority from the one who was failing to the one who held the key. The remaining men of Team Bravo were no longer looking at their Master Chief. They were looking at the quiet woman with the tablet. They were cold, they were scared, and they were witnessing the complete meltdown of their command structure. They were looking for a solution, and they instinctively knew he did not have it. Sharma's eyes met his. There was no triumph in them, no, "I told you so." There was only the cold, hard light of necessity. "There is another way," she said, "but you will have to do exactly as I say." The silence that followed was the sound of a hierarchy dissolving. Thorne stared at her, his jaw working, a dozen furious, impotent retorts dying on his lips. He was a king who had just been checkmated by a pawn, and the entire court was watching. The choice was simple, his ego or the lives of his men. It was Reyes who broke the spell. He took a step forward, his stance firm, his gaze locked on Sharma. "What's the plan, ma'am?" he asked. The ma'am was a subtle but profound surrender. It was an acknowledgement. It was a transfer of command. Sharma's gaze did not leave Thorne's, pinning him in place. She was giving him one last chance to lead by choosing to follow. The landslide blocked the primary entrance, but it also did something else. The seismic shock fractured a sealed karst conduit on the eastern side of the formation, connecting it to the main chamber where your men are trapped. She manipulated the image on her tablet, showing a 3D model of the caves. A new, faint line now blinked, connecting two previously separate systems. It's a small opening, approximately 1 meter in diameter, and it's 20 meters below the surface. But it's there. So we send divers down? To that new entrance? Reyes asked, hope creeping into his voice. No, Sharma countered immediately. The conduit is unstable. The pressure differential between the main chamber and the open sea is causing a massive outflow, a Venturi effect. The current through that opening is over 30 knots. No diver could survive it. It would be like swimming into the intake of a jet engine. The flicker of hope died. Thorne let out a bitter, strangled laugh. So there's a door, but it's a door that kills you. Great. That's your plan? To tell us how they're going to die in a new and interesting way? It is not a door, Sharma corrected him, her patience as thin and strong as a carbon nanotube. It is a valve, and we are going to reverse the flow. She turned her full attention to the men of Team Bravo, her voice taking on a new quality. It was still calm, still precise, but it was now laced with an undeniable authority. She was no longer an observer. She was in command. I need two things. I need the PE4 charges from your demolition kits, all of them, and I need the man with the most precise sense of timing. The men glanced at each other. A few of them nodded toward a tall, lanky candidate named Peterson, who was known for his preternatural ability to count seconds in his head, even under extreme duress. Peterson, Sharma said, her eyes finding him, you're with me. Reyes, gather the charges. The rest of you, prepare to enter the water. You will be the extraction team. Enter the water where? One of them asked. Here, she said, pointing to a spot on the beach, seemingly at random. You will wait for my signal. Thorne finally spoke, his voice a low growl. This is insane. What are you going to do with the C4? You said yourself a blast would bring the whole thing down. I am not bringing it down, she explained, her focus now entirely on the mission, as if he were just part of the background noise. I am tuning it. The initial landslide created a state of critical tension in the rock. I am going to use a precisely shaped and timed charge to create a resonant shock wave. Not to shatter the rock, but to make it ring like a bell. That vibration, if applied at the correct frequency, will create a harmonic interference pattern with the outflow from the karst conduit. For a period of approximately 90 seconds, the destructive interference of the two pressure waves will create a node of still water, a hydraulic safe, directly in front of the opening. She looked at the assembled men, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning awe. It's called a turn, a moment of engineered calm in the heart of a storm. It will reverse the current, briefly sucking water into the cave system. That will be the signal to Team Alpha. They will feel the pressure shift. They will have 90 seconds to exit the conduit and reach the surface before the flow reverts to lethal. It was audacious. It was brilliant. It was so far beyond the scope of their training and understanding that it felt like magic. But the cold, hard physics in her voice made it real. She was not talking about what she hoped would happen. She was describing the sequence of events as if they had already occurred. Thorne just stared, speechless. He was watching a watchmaker explain how to build a universe, while all he knew how to do was smash things with a rock. Reyes, the charges, Sharma commanded again, her voice sharp, breaking the spell. Peterson, the chronometer from my kit. We have less than 20 minutes of viable air for Team Alpha. The clock started when the rock fell. Move! This time, there was no hesitation. The men moved with a speed and purpose they had not shown all day. They were no longer following the rank on a man's collar. They were following the certainty in a woman's voice. Authority had not been seized. It had simply flowed to its natural source. Sharma turned and began walking down the beach, her eyes scanning the cliff face, not with the detached air of an analyst, but with the focused intensity of a surgeon planning a life-or-death incision. The ghost was no longer observing the machine. She was about to operate it. The execution was a symphony of brutal precision. Sharma did not run. She moved with an economy of motion that wasted not a single joule of energy. Reyes and Peterson scrambled to keep up, their lungs burning in the cold air. She led them not to the base of the cliff, but to a ledge 50 feet up, accessible by a treacherous, scree-covered path she seemed to know by heart. "Here," she said, stopping at a fissure in the rock, a crack barely wider than her hand. It seemed insignificant, just another fracture in a mountain of them. "This is the primary sympathetic fault line. The stress is focused here. It's the tuning fork." Reyes arrived, breathing heavily, and handed her the satchel containing the small blocks of C4. She took them, her hands working with a surgeon's deftness. She was not preparing a demolition charge. She was sculpting. She broke the blocks apart, kneading the malleable explosive into specific shapes: wedges, spheres, and long, thin strips. It was like watching a master potter, if the clay were capable of leveling a city block. "Peterson," she said, without looking up from her work. "The hydrostatic pressure in the main chamber is currently 4.8 bar. The outflow velocity creates a corresponding pressure drop to 1.1 bar at the conduit exit. I will create a pulse of 800 kilopascals with a frequency of 1.2 hertz for a duration of 2.2 seconds. This will generate the necessary destructive interference wave." Peterson stared at her, his mind struggling to process the flood of data. "Ma'am, how do you know that?" "The mountain told me," she replied, her voice flat. She pressed a thin strip of C4 deep into the fissure. "When the charge detonates, I need you to start your count. The shock wave will take 4.7 seconds to propagate through the saturated rock and reach the conduit. The hydraulic node will form and hold for exactly 94 seconds. At the 80-second mark, you will give the signal. A single blast on this." She handed him a small, high-frequency emergency whistle. "The extraction team will hear it. It's their signal to converge on the target area. Not a second before, not a second after. Are you clear?" 80 seconds from detonation." "Yes, ma'am," Peterson said, his voice now rock steady. He understood his role. He was a cog in her machine, and he could see the perfect logic of its design. Sharma continued her work, placing the shaped charges in a precise, almost artistic pattern along the fault line. It was not about maximizing the blast. It was about shaping the energy, directing the shockwave with pinpoint accuracy. She was using one of the most chaotic forces known to man to create a moment of perfect engineered order. She inserted the detonator caps, linking them with a thin strand of det cord, a spider's web of potential energy. "Reyes," she commanded, "get back to the beach. Inform the extraction team of the rally point. It will be approximately 60 meters offshore, bearing 290 from this position. They will see the upwelling. That's where Alpha Team will surface. Tell them they will have less than 15 seconds to get them out of the water before the vortex reforms." "Yes, ma'am." Reyes turned and scrambled back down the path, his movements now filled with a desperate, focused energy. Sharma and Peterson were alone on the ledge. She attached the remote detonator, a simple handheld device. She looked out at the sea, her eyes calculating distance, drift, wave height. She looked at the sky, noting the slight shift in the wind. Every variable was being fed into the impossibly complex equation in her head. Down on the beach, Thorne stood like a man made of stone, watching. He was no longer in command, no longer an obstacle. He was irrelevant. He was a spectator at his own court-martial. "The trapped men," Peterson asked, his voice quiet. "How will they know?" "They are seals," Sharma said. "They are trained to feel the water. The inflow will be unmistakable. It will be a sudden, violent reversal of pressure, a hand pulling them instead of pushing them. They will know it's a window. Their training will do the rest." She looked at him, her dark eyes holding his for a moment. "Their survival is now a function of their discipline and our precision. We must not fail them." She keyed her own comm unit, a small bead in her ear. "Reyes, is the extraction team in position?" "Affirmative," his voice crackled back. "They're in the water, waiting for the signal." Sharma took a deep breath, the first sign of anything resembling human tension she had shown all day. She looked at Peterson. "Ready?" He nodded, his eyes fixed on the display of his chronometer, his thumb hovering over the start button. She looked back at the sea. She held the detonator in her hand. Her mind was a silent, crystalline space. She saw the shock wave propagating through the rock, a wave of pure force. She saw the pressure waves colliding in the water, canceling each other out. She saw the 94-second window of calm opening in the chaos. She saw the 8 men, their air nearly gone, feeling the pull, a sudden gift of hope in a watery tomb. Now, she pressed the button. The explosion was not a boom. It was a sharp, resonant crack, like the universe snapping a bone. The ledge under their feet jumped, a violent, vertical shudder. The sound echoed off the surrounding peaks, a single, pure note. It was a shockingly small sound for the force it represented. It was the sound of surgery. "Counting," Peterson said, his voice a low monotone. His thumb had hit the button the instant he felt the shock. The clock was running. Sharma's eyes were fixed on a patch of water 60 meters from shore. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. The waves continued their chaotic rhythm. The wind howled. Thorne on the beach took an involuntary step forward, his fists clenched. Had it failed? And then the sea grew still. It was the most unnatural thing any of them had ever seen. In a circle roughly 50 feet in diameter, the churning, white-capped surface of the ocean simply went flat. The waves seemed to break against an invisible wall, their energy dissipating. The water inside the circle became as smooth and dark as obsidian. It was a perfect, momentary lake in the middle of a raging sea. The hydraulic safe. The turn. It was real. 75 seconds, Peterson counted, his voice unwavering. 76, 77. The men in the water, the extraction team, stared in disbelief. They could feel the strange stillness, the deadening of the violent energy around them. 79. Sharma's gaze was a physical force, boring into the center of that calm circle of water. 80. Peterson raised the whistle to his lips and blew a single, piercing blast. The sound sliced through the air, a command to the waiting swimmers. Immediately, the 10 men of Team Bravo began swimming with everything they had, converging on the placid water. The surface of the dark circle broke. One black hooded head, then another, and another, and another. 8 heads in total. Team Alpha. They surfaced, gasping, ripping their regulators from their mouths. Some were barely conscious, their movements sluggish, their eyes wide with shock and oxygen deprivation. They had made it. 89 seconds, Peterson said. 90. The extraction team reached them, grabbing their exhausted comrades, hauling them, supporting them. 93, 94. As if a switch had been flipped, the circle of calm vanished. The water erupted, imploding upon itself. A swirling vortex formed where the still patch had been, the sea reclaiming its territory with a furious, sucking roar. The currents reverted, the chaos returned. But it was too late. Team Bravo, with their precious cargo, were already clear, kicking frantically for the shore, pulling the men of Team Alpha through the surf. A profound silence fell upon the ledge. Peterson slowly lowered his chronometer, a look of pure, unadulterated awe on his face. He looked at Sharma. She was already packing her gear, her face a mask of calm professionalism, as if she had just finished a routine calibration. She had not just saved 8 men. She had bent the laws of physics to her will. She had faced down a mountain and an ocean, and had imposed upon them a moment of perfect, life-saving order. She had turned chaos into a tool. Down on the beach, the scene was one of controlled pandemonium. Medics were rushing to the survivors, who were being half-dragged, half-carried onto the shingle. They were alive, battered, hypothermic, and in shock, but alive. Thorne stood apart, watching the scene, his face ashen. He had been prepared to write a report, to notify families, to live with the consequences of his disastrous command. And in the space of 2 minutes, this woman, this analyst, had erased his failure. She had not only saved his men, she had saved him from himself. But it was not a reprieve. It was a judgment. As Sharma and Peterson made their way back down to the beach, the men of Team Bravo and the newly rescued Team Alpha parted for them. They stared at her, their expressions a mixture of gratitude, confusion, and a deep, instinctual reverence. They didn't understand what she had done, not really, but they understood the result. She had walked into an impossible situation, overruled a Master Chief, and brought their brothers back from the dead with a small block of plastic explosive and a tablet computer. She was no longer a ghost. She was something else entirely, something more. The whine of helicopter rotors began to cut through the air, growing steadily louder. A single black HH-60 Pave Hawk swept in low over the water and settled onto a flat, rocky outcrop 100 yards down the beach. This was not a standard medical evacuation chopper. This was something else. As the rotors spun down, the side door slid open and a tall, lean officer in a dry suit and a simple navy ball cap jumped out. He had the quiet, unmistakable air of senior command. He walked toward the group, his eyes scanning the scene, taking in the exhausted survivors, the stunned trainees, the petrified figure of Master Chief Thorne, and finally settling on Sharma. "Report, Specialist," the officer said, his voice calm and authoritative. It was Thorne who answered, his voice thick and hoarse. "Sir, Captain Bennett, there was an incident, a landslide. He trailed off, unable to articulate the magnitude of his failure. Captain Bennett's gaze did not leave Sharma. "I didn't ask you, Master Chief. I asked the analyst." Sharma stepped forward, her tablet in her hand. At 14:32 Zulu, a Class 3 submarine landslide occurred, sealing the primary entrance to the Devil's Throat cave system, with Team Alpha inside. The event was consistent with predictive models generated at 09 Zulu. A rescue operation was executed using a shaped charge-induced hydraulic node to create a temporary egress window. All 8 members of Team Alpha recovered. No casualties. Her report was clinical, precise, and utterly damning. She had left out a single, crucial detail: who had given the initial, fatal order. She didn't need to. Captain Bennett nodded slowly, his expression grim. He finally turned his gaze to Thorne. The air crackled. "Master Chief Thorne, you were the senior enlisted man on site. You were the lead instructor for this evolution." "Yes, sir," Thorne managed, his voice barely a whisper. "Did you receive Specialist Sharma's environmental threat assessment this morning?" Thorne's face went white. He had received it. It had arrived as a data file an hour before the exercise. He had deleted it without reading it, dismissing it as more academic nonsense from the pencil pusher. His thumb, tapping a screen, had almost signed the death warrant for 8 men. He could not speak. His silence was a confession. "I see," Bennett said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "You had the data. You had the prediction. You had the truth, and you dismissed it because it didn't fit your worldview, because it came from an analyst and not from the gut of a warrior. You traded the lives of your men for the sake of your own ego. The only reason they are standing here today is because Specialist Sharma possesses a degree of competence and intellectual courage that you cannot even begin to comprehend." Bennett took a step closer to Thorne, his voice a blade. "Your arrogance did not just endanger this team, Master Chief. It revealed a fundamental flaw in your ability to lead. You are relieved of your instructional duties, effective immediately. You will be reassigned pending a full board of inquiry. Pack your gear. My helicopter is waiting." Thorne stood there, his world dismantled around him. The humiliation was absolute, a crushing weight far heavier than any physical burden. He had been broken not by an enemy, but by his own pride, and the sentence had been delivered in front of the very men he had led, and failed. Without another word, he turned and began the long, lonely walk toward the waiting helicopter, a man stripped of his rank, his authority, and his honor. A heavy silence settled over the beach. The men watched him go, their faces impassive. Justice had been swift, and it had been absolute. Captain Bennett turned back to the group, his expression softening slightly as he looked at the exhausted SEALs. "Get the survivors to the infirmary. The rest of you debrief in 1 hour." He waited until the men began to move. Then he walked over to Sharma, who was cleaning her tablet screen with a soft cloth. "A textbook turn, Anya," he said, his voice now warm and familiar. "They'll be writing about that one at Nav Spec Werdevgru for years." She looked up, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than clinical analysis crossed her face. It was the faint shadow of weariness. "It was too close, Ben. The probability models were solid, but the human element is always the most volatile variable." The trainees who remained nearby froze. The captain had called her Anya. He spoke to her not as a superior to a subordinate, but as a peer. Bennett smiled grimly. "That's the variable you're here to fix." He then raised his voice slightly, so the remaining men could hear clearly. "For those of you who are confused, allow me to clarify. This is Commander Anya Sharma of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group's Advanced Science and Tactics Directorate. She is not an analyst. She is one of the chief architects of our next-generation operational environment protocols. Her work has saved more lives in the last 2 years than any single operator in this command. She is here to audit and overhaul our training methodologies, to ensure that what happened today never happens again. Master Chief Thorne was her first and most spectacular data point. The revelation landed with the force of a second shockwave. Commander, a full-blown O5, not just an officer, but a senior officer from the legendary, almost mythical development group. The quiet, unassuming woman with the clipboard was one of the giants of their world, walking among them in disguise. They had seen her as an outsider, a ghost. They now understood she was the one who wrote the rules. Their perception of the entire week, of every interaction, was instantly and irrevocably recontextualized. Her quiet observations, her strange questions, her clash with Thorne, it all snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. It hadn't been a conflict. It had been an evaluation, a test. And Thorne had failed in the most spectacular way possible. A new order settled onto the cold shingle of the beach. It was a quieter, more thoughtful order. The bluster and bravado that Thorne had championed felt cheap and hollow now. In its place was a dawning respect for a different kind of strength. The strength of intellect, of precision, of seeing the world not as a nail to be hammered, but as a complex system to be understood and, if necessary, manipulated. Later that evening, the base's small common area was subdued. The men spoke in low tones, the usual post-exercise swagger entirely absent. Commander Sharma sat alone at a small table in the corner, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands, her tablet beside her. She was inputting her final notes, her face illuminated by the cool blue light of the screen. No one approached her. They kept a respectful distance, as if she were a source of immense energy they did not know how to handle. Then, Petty Officer Reyes detached himself from the group. He walked over to her table, holding a fresh, steaming mug. He stood there for a moment, and she looked up from her screen, her expression neutral. "Ma'am," he said quietly. He placed the fresh mug on the table beside her, nearly empty one. He did not offer praise. He did not gush or thank her. He knew, instinctively, that she would find such displays inefficient. Instead, he simply asked a question. "The harmonic interference, you used a single detonation point. How did you shape the charge to create a uniform 1.2 Hz wave instead of a chaotic multi-frequency blast?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of Sharma's mouth. It was the first one anyone had seen. He wasn't praising her. He was trying to understand. He was learning. This, more than the salutes or the deference, was the truest sign of respect. This was the beginning of the change she was here to implement. The C4 was arranged in a logarithmic spiral, she explained, her voice quiet, meant only for him. It forced the detonation sequence to propagate along a pre-calculated path, focusing the primary energetic release into a single, coherent pressure wave. It's a technique adapted from non-linear acoustics. I can show you the math. "I'd like that, ma'am," Reyes said. And in that simple exchange, a new hierarchy was cemented, one based not on the volume of a man's voice or the rank on his collar, but on the relentless pursuit of competence. Her work here was done. The next morning, as the weak Alaskan sun struggled to burn through the persistent fog, the black helicopter returned. Commander Sharma, her gear packed, walked across the gravel toward it, her footsteps the only sound in the quiet morning. The remaining trainees stood in a loose formation, watching her go. They didn't salute. It felt inadequate. They simply stood, silent and observant, witnesses to a fundamental shift in their world. As she boarded the helicopter, she paused and looked back, her gaze sweeping over the men and the dark, brooding cliffs behind them. She had arrived as a ghost, an anonymous analyst. She left as a legend, a story they would tell for the rest of their careers. The story of the quiet woman who listened to the mountain, who commanded the sea, and who taught them that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal is a mind that can see the hidden patterns of the world. The doors of the Pave Hawk slid shut, and it lifted into the gray sky, disappearing into the clouds as quietly as it had come, leaving behind only the echo of a lesson learned in the crucible of cold water and fractured rock